Good day, students. So today we'll be discussing the history of experimental psychology. But I'd like you to know that the history of experimental psychology is not so different from the history of psychology. Why is that, you ask? Now, don't forget that most of the early fathers or founding fathers of psychology were physics scholars, physics researchers, and philosophy researchers. So merging it together, they started out on the platform of science. So most of the researches they carried out were science-based and were done in the laboratory. So the experimental psychology history is closely knitted with the history of psychology. Now, experimental psychology can be defined as a scientific and empirical approach to the study of the mind, definitely. And then it means that the approaches used means that you administer a test, or you have at least minimum of two groups, a control group and an experimental group. So both groups are in different conditions. All right? Now, so let's just go through over the evolution and history of psychology or experimental psychology. And here are some of the important contributors to the history of psychology. We have Plato, that is as far back as 428 to 347 BCE. He was a Greek philosopher who argued for the role of nature in psychological development. So psychology has been in existence for so long. So we have a lot of history of psychology dating back as far as BCE. All right, let's go to the more recent.
But I want to ask you a question there. Now you're talking about philosopher.
Yes.
Okay. And we're talking about experimental psychology. So what's the relationship?
Okay. What makes psychology is not a purely scientific field. The philosophy aspect makes it the social sciences. That is what differentiates psychology. It was the curiosity of the philosophers and the curiosity of the physicists that made them come together. Okay, let's match. Okay, we are not from the sciences. You are from the sciences. Okay, they are questioning, how does the mind work? They want to understand, is the mind the same with the brain? Okay. What's the difference?
Okay, where I agree with you is this: even when you are conducting an experiment, you still have to start from the theoretical basis.
Yes.
And that is the where philosophy comes in.
Yes.
So continue.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, so coming down, we have...
Mention those cases too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. We have Aristotle, we have Thomas Hobbes, was an English philosopher, René Descartes. Am I sure?
Yeah.
Was a French philosopher. Then John Locke, that's as far back as 1704.
I like that of John Locke. Is that not tabula rasa?
Yes. Good. It was an English philosopher as well. So you see a lot of philosophers coming up. That is what makes a psychology a beautiful blend of science and non-science. Makes it a beautiful, that is why you can reason and think, okay, you can have a theoretical based or a non-practical based question you want to answer, and then you still answer it in a scientific approach. Mm-hmm. All right, so we have Jean Jacques, Gustav Frechner, Charles Darwin.
I want you to do something.
What's that?
Can you, the major achievement of each of those contributions to experimental psychology, is it possible to bring them out?
Yes, I was working with 10 minutes. Okay, we have Gustav Frechner was a German experimental psychologist who developed the idea of the just noticeable difference. That means he was a physicist, which is considered to be the first empirical psychological measurement.
That's right.
Charles Darwin was a British naturalist whose theory of natural selection influenced the functionalist school and the field of evolutionary psychology.
That's evolution, theory of evolution.
Yes. William Wundt was a German psychologist who opened one of the first psychology laboratories and helped develop the field of structuralism.
So why is this guy called the father of psychology?
Because he opened or started one of the very first psychology laboratories and also developed the field of structuralism.
So by implication, what we're saying is the first true psychological experiment was actually carried out by this guy.
Yes.
That was why they attributed they called him the father of psychology.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and he lived between the years 1832 to 1920. Okay. We have William James. He was also in the 18th century. He's an American psychologist who opened one of the first psychology laboratories and helped develop the field of functionalism. William Wundt's structuralism and William James's functionalism.
Okay.
Ivan Pavlov was a Russian psychologist whose experiment on learning led to the principles of classical conditioning.
Wonderful. Is that the dog dog experiment?
Yeah, exactly.
I love that experiment.
Yeah, it brought to limelight the concept of learning. He made us understand how learning process takes place and how you can, teach someone, you can correct a behavior or modify a behavior.
That's right.
Hermann Ebbinghaus was a German psychologist who studied the ability of people to remember lists of nonsense syllables under different conditions. That's also memory. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian psychologist who founded the field of psychodynamic psychology. We have Edward Bradford.
Wait a minute, did he perform any experiments to confirm some of his philosophy, ideas?
Sigmund Freud? Not basically. He worked with patients, his patients. He worked with...
He was observing them and then...
Observational method.
But they didn't put any manipulate any variable to see the effect.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Maybe we need to check more on that. It can be, okay. In fact, I was going to even suggest that maybe some of our students can also try to investigate the real experiment, the core experiment, some of this they carried out and report on them to learn more about some of their contributions. Yes, exactly.
But Sigmund Freud basically used the observational approach. So that's why I said the history of experimental psychology is similar to that of psychology itself, because it was later on that the descriptive mode of observation started. It was later on that the descriptive mode of observation started. So we have John B. Watson. He was the American psychologist who contributed to the field of behavioralism.
When the light goes off.